Do you have an iPhone 14 Pro Max and you're trying to figure out if it makes any sense to upgrade to the iPhone 16 Pro Max? Well, if so, this video is for you, because in this video, we're going to compare everything between these two devices, from the speakers, the display, the cameras, and everything else, just to help you decide if it makes any sense to upgrade to the new iPhone 16 Pro Max. And to kick us off, let's just go ahead and start with the most obvious of differences, and that is the design. And at first glance, they both look like iPhones, right? Essentially, since the iPhone 12 line in 2020, they look basically the same. And, for better or for worse, but there are a couple of differences between them. The first is that the 14 Pro Max is actually framed in stainless steel. This is a shiny, polished stainless steel that gets pretty fingerprinty. But the 16 Pro Max is framed in titanium, which has more of a matte finish. It hides fingerprints a little bit easier, and I do find it a little bit easier to clean. The titanium on the 16 Pro Max, the frame, is slightly more rounded than what you're going to find on the flatter edges of the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which does make it a little bit more comfortable to hold in your hand when the iPhone is naked. Size-wise, they are essentially the same size in width. They are both 77 millimeters wide, but the 16 Pro Max is 163 millimeters tall, and the 14 Pro Max is 160 millimeters tall. And this is because the 16 Pro Max did get a screen size adjustment, which we'll talk about in just a moment. As far as the weight goes, the 16 Pro Max, although it being bigger, is 227 grams compared to 240 grams on the 14 Pro Max. The titanium difference in the frame and some other design changes actually make this larger phone even lighter. When it comes to the camera bump on these two devices, they look basically the same as well. It's hard to see any size difference just looking at them. They're both a 3-camera array that includes a wide, an ultra-wide, and a telephoto lens. On the bottom, you have similar speaker and microphone cutouts, but on the 16 Pro Max, you have USB-C, and on the 14 Pro Max, you have a Lightning connector. On the left-hand side, you do have the volume buttons for up and down. The 14 Pro Max has that same silent mute switch since the original iPhone, and the 16 Pro Max has the action button. On the right-hand side, we have the sleep-wake button on both devices, and in place of the 14 Pro Max cutout for 5G ultra-wideband, on the 16 Pro Max, we have the new camera control, don't call it a button. Because both of these devices are so similar on the outside, I really like both of these designs. I do find that the 16 Pro Max is a bit more comfortable to hold in my hand because of the rounded edges, but if you have a 14 Pro Max in deep purple, you might be disappointed in the color options of the 16 Pro Max, which only comes in white, black, and 2 grayish versions. But if you do decide to pick up an iPhone 16 Pro Max, you're probably going to want to keep it in pristine condition like most people. And that's where today's sponsor comes in, and that's Taurus. The O-Stand 360 spin case combines all the features of a case, a phone stand, a MagSafe back, and a finger ring into one slim, protective design. The elegant design is inspired by sparks of time and energy, with the 3 lines representing hands on a clock, and the dune color inspired by the sands in an hourglass. This is no flimsy silicone case. This case is made from high-quality polycarbonate and TPU to give the case a rigid feel while fully protecting from up to a 12-foot drop with only minimal thickness. As the original designer of O-shaped stand cases, Taurus has gone even further with the O-Stand 360 spin. In landscape mode, you can watch a movie while making dinner, or use it with the iPhone standby mode. In portrait mode, you can join a FaceTime call, or you can even use the stand to securely hold the iPhone when taking photos. And of course, it is MagSafe compatible with 18N magnet force for charging and other accessories. Taurus also has the Glass Go X screen protector with the easiest installation I have ever seen. You simply need to snap on the installation frame to the iPhone and pull the bottom tab for a completely seamless, bubbleless screen protector. This screen protector is completely transparent and still has military-grade protection from impact and scratches. So if you want to pick up the Taurus O-Stand 360 spin case that is both beautiful and protective, or the Glass Go X screen protector for your new iPhone 16 or 16 Pro, you can find them in the links below, and my thanks to Taurus for sponsoring this video. When it comes to the displays between the iPhone 14 Pro Max and the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you're actually not going to find a lot of differences. The 14 Pro Max is a 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR OLED display. The 16 Pro Max is a 6.3-inch Super Retina XDR OLED display. Barely any difference. Both of these devices have the same 120 Hz ProMotion display to basically dynamically adjust the frame rate of the device depending on what's being displayed. They both have an always-on display to allow for always-on glanceable information or for use with Apple's standby mode. They both have the same 460 pixels per inch, which makes everything extremely sharp on these devices, especially text. They both have the same 2,000,000:1 contrast ratio with up to 1,000 nits of typical brightness, 1,600 nits with HDR, and up to 2,000 nits when viewing outside. One benefit that the 16 Pro Max has over the 14 Pro Max is that the display can actually get down to just 1 nit, which means that when you're using the iPhone in the darkest of situations, you can get something that's a little bit nicer on the eyes and a little bit less distracting to the people around you. And lastly, they both have the dynamic island on their displays, so you get the dynamic island stuff. And if you have a 14 Pro Max, you know exactly what that is. One of the biggest advantages of the iPhone 16 Pro Max over the 14 Pro Max is the addition of the USB-C port on the bottom. This makes everything so much easier. Anytime you're trying to connect anything to your iPhone with a Lightning connection, it's just more difficult. You need different adapters to do different things, to get video out, to get data off. It's a pain in the butt. But because USB-C is so ubiquitous across the entire industry, USB-C on the iPhone makes getting anything off the iPhone easier. You want to plug in your iPhone to a hotel room using HDMI? Easy. You get an HDMI to USB-C adapter. You want to quickly get some of that ProRes video off of your iPhone onto your computer? Easy. USB-C. You want to connect another camera or microphone or other accessories to the iPhone? Easy with USB-C. And with USB-C, it makes traveling so much easier if all of your devices use the exact same cable, so you don't need to bring more cables and more power adapters to charge all of your devices. USB-C has been really, really nice on the iPhone 16 Pro. And for anyone who considers themselves a pro iPhone user, you're going to want that and you will appreciate it. The action button that was introduced with the iPhone 15 Pro line carries over to the 16 and 16 Pro line. And my opinion of the action button over the last year plus has kind of changed a couple of times. It's kind of gone back and forth. I did initially think that the removal of the silent switch on the iPhone that's been there since the original iPhone was a weird, odd move. But then everyone started talking about the possibilities. But Apple did give you a number of things you could do right off the bat with the action button, including setting it just to the silent mode or the mute button like it was before. You can set it to focus modes, you can enable the camera, you can open up the flashlight, or just about anything with shortcuts built into the action button. I've seen people use shortcuts to build out big menus when using the action button, so you can tap the action button and then you get a whole list of things that you can do with it. I find that to be a little bit overwhelming. If I'm going to pull up a whole list, why wouldn't I just open up the app in the first place? It didn't make a lot of sense to me. I did set it initially to the camera because it made sense. Okay, here's a quick access to the camera, but there's so many ways to open up the camera. And eventually I settled on the flashlight. I actually use the flashlight all the time, multiple times a day sometimes, for everything from looking under the couch for the remote, or looking under my desk for a pencil or something that I dropped, adding a little additional light to my toolbox, or checking out a weird mole on my butt. I find the action button set as the flashlight to be very, very useful for me. When it comes to cameras, there are a number of technical upgrades between the 14 Pro Max and the 16 Pro Max. One of the main reasons I upgrade my iPhone every year is because of the updated camera systems. But I have to admit, I'm not a pixel peeping person who can tell you the exact intricacies and detailed differences between two iPhone photos. For the longest time, I wanted better cameras to take photos of my daughter as she grew up. And now that she's nearly 13, that rarely happens anymore, but every now and then there is something new in a camera system that I just have to have. And actually, it was the 5x tetraprism zoom from the 15 Pro Max. When the 5x zoom was added to the 15 Pro Max last year, it made a real difference in what I could capture and gave me results that I could not have had otherwise. Beyond just using it to get closer to one of the cats as it does something stupid or cute, I was able to capture photos and videos of my daughter's volleyball games that are actually usable and watchable. Videos that didn't just look like blobs flopping along a gym floor. Videos where you could see their faces and expressions as they gained a point or the disappointment when they didn't. And despite being only 2x different from the previous cameras or from the regular Pro of the 15, these are things that I could not capture with the 3x lens on the 14 Pro. The ultra-wide camera got a big boost this year with the 16 Pro Max getting a 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera, which supposedly makes both wide-angle and macro shots better. In this example of a street in Austin, besides the 14 Pro Max accidentally being set to a cool tone, the 16 Pro Max is sharper when zooming into the fire hydrant. But when looking at this macro shot of this tiny flower bud, I really didn't see much difference in sharpness between the 14 Pro Max and the 16 Pro Max. The main cameras on both the 14 Pro Max and 16 Pro Max are both 48 megapixel and 24 millimeter equivalent. And just looking at both of them side by side, I have a hard time seeing much difference. There might be some slight difference in white balance or brightness, but I could take 100 photos of the same thing from the same spot with both iPhones, and both of them will shift brightness and white balance slightly, no matter what. But without comparing the photos side by side between these two devices, I'm happy with how both of them look. The 16 Pro Max does get that feature that was introduced with the 15 Pro, where you can actually crop into the sensor to get slightly zoomed shots from 24mm to 48mm without digital zoom. For some reason this year, Apple is calling this the Fusion camera, and it seems like something Apple should be able to do with the 48 megapixel sensor on the 14 Pro Max via software, but I guess not. The iPhone 16 Pro Max also gets the next generation portraits from the 15 Pro, where it will automatically grab depth information when you take a photo of a person, dog, or cat, and then you can change the focus point and aperture later in software if you want. The photographic styles are updated for the 16 line that acts more like a color change to a raw photo than a filter. This lets you dial in exactly the look that you want. Plus, the iPhone keeps all of the data and you can change it afterwards if you don't like the results. For video capture, iPhones have been amazing for some time, and I don't use it nearly enough to show you the differences. But I will let you know that the 16 Pro Max can do ProRes log, whereas the 14 Pro Max can only do ProRes but no log. If you know what any of that means, then the 16 Pro will be a nice upgrade. If you don't, then don't worry about it. Both of these iPhones can capture 4K Dolby Vision up to 60 frames per second, but the 16 Pro Max can now also do 100 and 120 frames per second for some super slow motion. If you plan on using your iPhone a lot for video capture, then this will probably come in handy. Sometimes I do use my iPhones for B-roll shots, so I could see myself actually using this now and then because my big cameras can only do 4K 60 slow motion. With the addition of the studio quality 4-mic array, Apple has also added different audio adjustments that you can use afterwards to change the audio. There's different effects like cinematic or even studio mode to help you get a better sound out of your iPhone. These are features that anyone who uses their iPhone to create videos without any external audio equipment or microphones will probably enjoy, maybe. With the front-facing cameras, it seems to be the same 12-megapixel sensor between the two of them, with Apple's Smart HDR5 processing on the 16 Pro and Smart HDR4 on the 14 Pro. The 16 Pro also can record in up to Dolby Vision HDR compared to just standard HDR on the 14 Pro. Then, of course, there is the brand new camera control, don't call it a button, which allows you to quickly get to your iPhone camera, to take photos, and to make adjustments. If you're still wondering, yes, this button is an actual physical button. I guess it's a hybrid haptic and physical button because the button does actually press. It does actually have a full range of motion. Plus, you can use lighter presses to get haptic feedback to get to the quick controls to be able to control those with camera control. As far as the shutter button, the camera control works just fine for that purpose. However, it does seem to make me shift the iPhone just ever so slightly as I take the photo compared to just using my thumb. I can get a steadier shot using my thumb on the display than I can from using the camera control. You can use 2 light presses to bring up a menu to change the aperture, the zoom, the cameras, the style, and it works pretty well. And then a single tap to get into that option. So now I can easily zoom back and forth using the camera control, and it is pretty smooth for the most part. Now when I just do a single press, it's going to bring up that option that I have selected. And to change options, again, you just double light tap and then go to another option. So if you want to change the exposure as your camera control, you can do that as well. One of the biggest differences I found comparing these two devices side by side was the speakers. When playing the same sounds and music between these two devices and going back and forth, the speakers on the 14 Pro Max came out to a maximum of about 88 decibels, compared to just 83 decibels on the 16 Pro Max. And if you know anything about audio, 5 decibels is a big difference. The speakers on the 14 Pro Max are simply much louder than what you're going to find on the 16 Pro Max, and they even sound just a little bit punchier as well. The speakers on the 16 Pro Max just aren't as loud. They sound good for what they are, but they're nowhere near as loud as the 14. Battery life comparisons are always hard. When the iPhone 14 Pro Max was new, I was able to get 6-7 hours of screen time daily, no problem, and still have a little bit left before going to bed. Apple says that the 14 Pro Max got up to 29 hours of video playback compared to 33 hours of video playback on the 16 Pro Max. And in my testing and usage of the 16 Pro Max, I'm getting through a full day. I'm getting 5, 6, 7 hours of screen on time and still going to bed with a little bit left. If you can get through a full day on your iPhone 14 Pro Max, or you could when it was brand new, you're still going to be able to do that with the iPhone 16 Pro Max, maybe with a little bit extra tacked on. And if your battery is running a little bit lower than it was a couple of years ago because now it's a couple of years old, then you're going to see a nice big boost in the 16 Pro Max. Charging wise, the 14 Pro Max can charge it up to 27 watts or about 50% in 35 minutes. The 16 Pro Max can charge at up to 45 watts or about 50% in 30 minutes. Not a huge difference, but the 16 Pro Max also gets faster MagSafe charging, 25 watts instead of 15. As far as processing power goes, the iPhone 14 Pro Max has the A16 system in package with a 6-core CPU and 5-core GPU. The 16 Pro Max has the Apple A18 Pro with a 6-core CPU and a 6-core GPU. Both of them also have a 16-core neural engine. Looking at Geekbench 6, the iPhone 16 Pro Max is about 25% faster overall in both multi and single core testing, with single core getting a score of 3315 compared to 2651, and the multi-core on the 16 Pro getting a score of 7999 versus 6487. When it comes to Metal graphics benchmarking, the iPhone 16 Pro Max is even faster with 42% faster graphics compared to the 14 Pro Max. We can see the results of this increase in graphics with the GFX benchmark, which scored 28 frames per second on the 16 Pro Max versus 22. We can also check ray tracing performance with the 3D Mark Solar Bay stress test, where the 16 Pro Max was more than twice as fast as the best and worst loops of the 14 Pro Max. But what does all that extra performance in the 16 Pro Max actually get you in regular day-to-day usage? Not that much. You are not going to see a big difference, if any, when opening web pages or opening applications. There may be some differences in opening larger applications, larger games, or the performance of the games, especially if they're using ray tracing. But basically, every single app you open and use every day is going to run about the same. The benefits of the additional speed of the 16 Pro Max is that in 5 years, when we're at iOS 23 or whatever Apple calls it, the iPhone 16 Pro Max is probably going to run that a bit faster than the 14 Pro Max. These processors are built for longevity. These are built for 5, 6, 7, 8 years of software updates. But one thing that the 14 Pro Max absolutely will not be able to do is Apple Intelligence. Apple Intelligence is Apple's promise for things like AI mail summaries or inbox categories or notification summaries, writing tools to help you recreate your emails or rewrite them in a more professional manner. A Siri that is more conversational and can use your personal context to help you actually perform actions on your phone. Plus some other things that Apple announced, but none of which has shipped to iPhones yet. Yes, there is a beta and there's a public beta, but that's only for a subset of those Apple Intelligence features. It's going to be some time to see the rest of them roll out, if ever, or to see what else comes to Apple Intelligence. And the last difference really to mention between the 14 Pro Max and the 16 Pro Max is that there are updated antennas inside. The 16 Pro Max now has a thread radio built in for all those Matter devices that somehow still don't matter and maybe will in the future, but whatever. It also has the second generation ultra wideband chip, which gives you more accuracy to find your friends and find your things. And it also has Wi-Fi 7 compared to Wi-Fi 6 on the 14 Pro Max. Wi-Fi can be very finicky. If I place both of my devices on my desk with different networks, they still get the same speed. But if I pick up the phones and turn just a couple of degrees, I get completely different numbers with Wi-Fi 7 springing ahead. So really, unless you're just transferring really large files locally on your home network, Wi-Fi 7 isn't really gonna make anything faster for you. So the only question left to answer is, should you upgrade from the iPhone 14 Pro Max to the iPhone 16 Pro Max? And more than likely, the answer is no, you don't need to upgrade. But there are plenty of reasons to want to upgrade. If you want a slightly larger device that's lighter, you want a newer and bigger battery, you want USB-C, you want the upgraded radios, the upgraded camera and camera features, the action button, the camera control button, and the idea of Apple Intelligence is intriguing enough, then sure. If you can find a great carrier deal, go ahead and trade in your 14 Pro Max and you'll be good for another couple years on the 16 Pro Max. But if you're happy with your 14 Pro Max, there's probably no real reason to upgrade. You have the same screen, the performance is about the same, it's going to continue to run well for the next few years, you don't need to worry about fiddly new buttons, and plus, the speakers are still better in the 14 Pro Max. Overall, nothing will change in your regular day-to-day usage between these two devices, so you probably don't need to upgrade, but there are plenty of reasons to if you actually want them. Other than that, that's all I have to say about the iPhone 14 Pro Max and 16 Pro Max, but I'm curious what you guys think. Do you have a 14 Pro Max and you're considering upgrading? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, do you think that the buttons on the 16 Pro Max are worth upgrading from any device? Let me know below. Plus, if you haven't seen this video right over here, it's a good one. You're gonna love it. Yep. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked it, hit subscribe if you want, and I'll see you next time.